Hey there, welcome back to our channel. I'm Nicolai, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to create this stunning interior visualization from scratch. So in this tutorial we're going to cover everything from setting up the scene and lighting to choosing the right materials and adding final touches that will make your render stand out. I'll be using Cinema 4D and Corona, but don't worry if you're not familiar with them. I'll guide you through the process step by step. And by the end of this tutorial you'll have the skills you need to create the exact same image. So, this is the project I recently found online. It's from May Architects, and I really liked the roof structure, and I thought it would be nice to do a little tutorial on how to model it. So there's not really any plans or dimensions out there, but I found this one section here that we can use to set up the 3D model inside Cinema 4D. So I am using a plugin here called Blueprint Importer from Fuchs Vogel, and it's really helpful if you want to bring in some JPEG plans into the scene. Because we don't have any dimensions, I'm just grabbing this 3D guy here as a reference, but you can also just take a cube and give it a scale of a human person. We'll just use this person now and just roughly scale the section so that it fits roughly, but it doesn't really matter. It's not very accurate to do like this, but in this case we just want to grab the shape of the room. So with this simple polygon I started out and traced the contours of the room and making those two cuts here. So and then we have this simple shape that we can now use to build the entire room from. So first of all I'm going to separate the bottom part here, which we'll be using for the walls and the floor, and the upper part we will extract the beams from. So but first extrude the bottom part, and also we can separate the floor, which will be giving an extra material, so it'll be handy to just separate it. And then we are going to create the beams, and we are using the edges here. So I'll just extrude the edges here a bit, and then we'll also separate it from the polygon object that we can then get rid of. We don't need it anymore. It's just wanted to extract those polygons here to create our beams. And now I'm bringing in the reference again, because it's always useful if we have our photo next to our modeling scene. I'm using a tool called PureRef for that, which is handy if you don't have a second monitor. You can just put the image on top of your Cinema 4D and use it as a reference. So now we have this supporting beam on the horizontal line here that we need to extrude. So I'm just separating that from the walls, and we can give it some thickness. Doesn't really matter how much because we won't see it in the image, but it's always good to keep everything as close as possible to reality. So now we can extrude the beams, and as said before, I don't have any dimensions for the project, but we are using the photo reference here, and we'll just check and see if it looks like in the image. So in this case I just need to adjust the bottom beam a bit. It needs some more height here, and then I just need to repeat that for the last beam, and just going to extrude it so that it matches the horizontal beam here. And if you can see the blue polygons, that's when we need to reverse the normals. So just hit the UR and you're good to go. So now we need to match those two beams here, and I'm just going into the side view for that, and with the snapping tool activated we can just make a cut here and get rid of that polygon we don't need. So the upper part doesn't matter because we will model some wooden boards in between and we won't see it. So now we can actually start to clone the beams. For that I'm enlarging our room a bit, and now we can grab our 3 beams here that we already put into a folder, and now we can use a cloner and just put the beams into the cloner. Now everything lays on the ground. That's not what we want, but we just need to put it to linear mode and tick off this option here. And we also don't want to clone it along the y-axis, sorry, but alongside the z-axis. So I was thinking maybe 250, 270 centimeters should be fine. So to wrap up the process a bit, I started with a simple polygon because then you have everything in place if you go from that. If you just would model the beams and model the walls separately, you would have to bring it together and see that it has the right dimensions and sits in the right place. But if you start off with one polygon and extract everything from that, you will be sure that everything sits at the right place. So now I will start to establish the camera, because yeah, we can start to look a bit more at the reference and see for ourselves what kind of image we want to create from that. So for the camera it's important to set up the right height, the viewpoint, and also to zero out the angles. And I'm using that shift on the y-axis to bring the focus a bit more up, because we want the focus to be on the wooden structure here. So we can just see for ourselves if the distance between the beams is correct, but I think it looks something like the reference. So yeah, that looks good. So now we can start to extrude the shape here for the wooden boards in between. You can just extrude that from the beam here, and don't forget to organize your scene and name everything. Can really quickly get very nasty if you don't do that. So we have this background wall here that we also need to model. I'll just extract that from the walls and get rid of that slanted part on the edge, and yeah, something like that. Now we can start to work a bit more on the window parts. We have this beam that we can duplicate from our existing one that is part of the facade and sits outside or in front of the window, and then we can use our existing beam here again to extract another polygon that we can use to model the windows. So we just bring the polygon to the right height and extrude the edge again like we did before, and match it with the upper wooden boards part. And now in the reference you can see there's this middle part. I think it's called transom. I never heard this word before actually, but I just googled it and I think it's called transom. So and now we can make an inner extrude, but there's a little problem if you have this transom in the middle of a window and you want to make an inner extrude, because you can see the inner extrude affects all polygons the same way, so the middle part will be thicker, so we need to find a little workaround for that. And that's why we are going to preserve groups and make an inner extrude with preserve groups on, and then we separate the polygon, and now we make an inner extrude with preserve groups off. So then we have two polygon objects, and we can now connect those two polygon objects, and this way we have a frame that has the same thickness on all parts. And now we need to optimize the points here, because we separated those two polygon objects and the points are on the same position but they are not connected. So that's what we need to do. And now we can give the frame a thickness, so we can extrude it, and it's up to you how much you want to extrude the frame here. It looks always a bit nicer if it's thinner. Maybe something like that could match the reference. Yeah, if we go back into the camera, we can see it looks quite like the reference. I'm happy with that. Now I'm using a protection tag for the camera so that it doesn't, that you don't, if you come accidentally to the camera, it happened a lot to me, and you lose your standpoint. So it's good to use a protection tag for that one. And now we can start to work a bit more on the wooden boards that sits inside the beams here. So I want to use an edge cut and put it to 2, because we want to have 3 wooden boards sitting here in between. So I'll just duplicate the polygon and give it some thickness in the other direction. And for our original polygon, I'm using MS to make a bevel, so to get some little gap here in between those boards, and I will extrude that. So now we have a thickness and our boards. The thickness is just, we won't see it, but so that no light is coming through those little gaps. Okay, now that we've finished the modeling part, we can go ahead and create our first materials. So I'm starting off with this wooden material that we need for the beams, and I'm using a texture here from my texture collection that you can get at nicolaibecker.supply. And for this texture we have a glossiness map, so we need to switch in our advanced settings from roughness to glossiness, and then we can just load in our glossiness map. And now we just need to bring in the normal map, and we are doing that by using a normal shader from Corona. And we are good to go. So now we need to apply this material to our wooden beams, and we need to make sure that the orientation is correct. So let's first start to use a cubic mapping, and since the texture is not square in format, we need to scale it in the X direction, and then we can just in the texture mode use the rotate handles here to rotate the texture so that it fits the angle of our beam here. And now we are doing that for the other beams that we have. So you can just copy the texture tag and rotate it. And for our vertical beams here, you can just also use these numbers down there, and in this case we need a 90-degree rotation, and let's copy that for the other one. So now we are good to go, but we need some further adjustments here for our material, because if we would leave it like that, we would have some issues here, because for once there's the problem of texture repetition. If we would put that in the cloner now, the texture would sit for each cloner, for each object on the same position. So we would get a repetition here. So we can avoid that by using a variation shader. So we don't want to have any random colors here in this variation shader. You could also set random colors and stuff, but we also only want to use it to make the texture move for each object. So down there we can use the just a value of 100 for the UV settings. So that means that the texture is moving in this range for each object, for each clone. So we don't have any repetition here. But we need to apply this variation shader, of course, for all our texture slots. So you can just copy the variation shader here and put it in between here. So this is getting better. We have no more texture repetition right now, but we need to we can add some more feature here to our material, and it's the AO shader from Corona. And what it does, it gives you some kind of edge bear effect. So you can set the distance on how large you want this effect to be. In our case, we just want to have a tiny darker edge, kind of. This gives some more realism. So if you have any used materials, or like here you can see, if we turn it to red, you can see what it actually does. So you get this kind of edge that has a color, and we're just using a darker one or a black color here to give us some edge wear effect. And it also shows a little bit more the edges of a material, or the lines, the contours of an object, and therefore gets more attention, and the overall shape is a bit sharper. So we can use that for our wooden beams. And now let's continue with the plywood material. So we can delete the other material we just worked on in the node material editor, and now we can start to work on the plywood boards in between the structure. For that, I'm using a Corona multi shader. This one is handy if you have multiple textures you want to load in, but you don't want to do that manually and create 4 different materials. You can just create one shader here, and you can distribute this 4 textures randomly onto your objects. So this is very helpful if you have, in this example, like the plywoods, and we have 4 different textures here, and we can just use one shader for that. And same applies to the normal. And now we can connect it to the actual texture slots. So it's pretty easy to set it up, actually. So now also for this material we have a glossiness map, so we need to switch it to glossiness in the advanced settings. And for the normal, as we did before, we need this normal shader from the Corona plugin. And we are good to go. Okay, so now we can apply this material to the boards in between, and we are also using a cubic mapping here. And we can just we forgot to use the multi shader here on polygon mode, because our 3 boards now are 1 polygon object, and it would now only move or change for each clone, but we want to change it for each polygon so that the 3 different boards actually have a different texture here. So let's also scale it up a bit. I'm just eyeballing here the dimensions, and if we check on the interactive render, you can see that it worked actually very good, and we have the texture applied differently for each material. But I saw there's a little light gap, or there's a little light coming through the our structure here, so we just enlarging our structure here a bit so that there's no light coming through. So if we render that again, we can see that it now looks good. But also there's, yeah, we can start now with the materials for our windows, and therefore I was just using a simple metallic material from the library, nothing too fancy. So you can also use a material here also for the glass from the Corona material library. So just one more test render to check, and it looks good. So the horizontal beam also needs our wooden texture here, wooden material, so I'm applying it and scale it in both directions here. Okay, now we need to apply this plywood material to the last object here, and this will be our background wall. And because we want to not only one big plywood sheet here, we can separate the polygon into 6 different polygons. So because we have the polygons activated in our mix shader, for each polygon we have a different texture and it looks more realistic. So nice. But I realized there's some little light gap here above our window frames. So let's fix that. We can do that by just again grabbing the solid part here of our roof structure, and we can just manually extrude it so that the window frames sits here in between the structure and there's no light coming through. Okay, now to the bottom part. We want to apply our spruce board texture that we're using also for the beams, and for that I was just separating the bottom polygon into multiple polygons, and if we set in the variation shader to polygon, it will move for each polygon and we avoid this repetition as we did before. And we need to stretch the texture also. So now let's rename our texture. And how do we get it darker? There's several ways to do that, but I am using a filter on top of this wood texture, and I'm just playing around with the saturation, lightness and brightness settings here, sliders, and yeah, actually something like that could already give us what we want. So it's, you can see the wooden structure, but it's darker. So nice. Okay, we need to set it to polygon mode for each texture slot, of course. And now we need to work on the floor, and I was grabbing a material here from the library, and it's a green linoleum, so I was thinking more about a reddish orangey floor here. So I was coloring that, and I'm scaling it a bit up because I know that the reflection map for the linoleum looks better if it's scaled a bit up. And now we can test render and see what it does. Looks a little bit dull. I want this texture to be a bit more saturated to make it a nice contrast here to our black walls. And I want to make it a bit more stand out. So something like that. So as you can see, it looks good, but there's lots of bouncing light coming from the floor and coloring our wood structure here also orange. And that could be nice, but in our example, I don't want that. And there's a trick that you can use. It's called a ray switcher material, and you can just put in our orange texture here into this ray switcher material, make a copy, and make a white version here from this material, and put this white in the refraction and global illumination tab. So now that if we put this on our material and render it again, you can see there's still the orange floor, but there's no orange coming to the rest of the scene. So there's no color bleeding. And in some cases this, especially if you have a very strong color in your scene, you don't want to spread it all over your scene, it can be useful. So now I was establishing another feature here. I was thinking that maybe a round window here could work really nice and get a more second focus point or counterpart to this wooden roof structure. So, but first I was thinking to bring some assets in. So I was using a few assets from my library, and yeah, just renaming the stuff and just put it or distribute it here in the room. And I was just looking for nice composition here. So let's change the format to square and just eyeball here and see how we can arrange our assets here. So because the light is coming from the large windows on the right, and it should hit the workspace here. This is the idea kind of the room, that you have this natural daylight that is illuminating the workspaces here. So it's a good start, but we want to make some further adjustments, and I was really going for that round window here, and I was thinking it would be nice to have some nature, or also some trees sitting in front of that window. So I was using a Boolean operation, and the actual cylinder I was using to create the window from. So we can just extrude it a bit to give the frame kind of a thickness. We can just apply our wood material, maybe use a cylindrical mapping for that, or something like that. We won't see too much of it anyways. And I was not really sure about the position here, So in this case, it could be nice to help out and switch off the materials, because they can extract, they can, distract you from the actual composition sometimes. And I was using some composition filters for the camera, so they can help sometimes to arrange certain elements in your composition. So there's rule of thirds and golden ratio for the camera, and it's not always the way to go, but it can help you to work on your composition. So I was extruding this floor element here, and as I said, we have bouncing light, and sometimes you want it and sometimes you don't want it, like with our floor example. But I was applying a green kind of grassy material here for our exterior floor, and there's actually some, you won't see it because it's outside, but there's actually some green bounce light coming into the scene, and that's what I in this case I want that, because I want to set some more focus on the natural environment on the scene, and bring some more green tones into the scene, into the color palette. And now we can actually start to put some trees into the scene. So I was using some trees here. I will also link them in the description. It's mostly from 3D Sky or Turbo Squid. And I was just arranging some trees here in front of the round window. So this is actually kind of a forest in front of the window, and we have these lighter trees that we want to use to for one, get a nice background, and we can see some trees outside of the window, but also we want to use them to, if we put on the sun later on, it's always nice to have some tree shade in our room that makes the light appear more natural. And for that I'm placing more lighter trees here outside. Okay, now before we work a bit more on our lighting, we can organize our scene a bit more and put everything into folders, and it's just nicer to work with an organized scene. And now we can use the Corona Sky that we have already been using to test our materials and stuff, but I want to bring in an hdri. It's one of my favorites from No Emotion. I'll put the link in the description also. And it's just an overcast sky that is very nice to illuminate your scene and give it an overall brightness that looks very nice. So if you test render, we need to increase the exposure here a bit, but you can see it already looks very nice. And maybe you can also see what I meant with bounce light here. The green bounce light that is coming from the trees and the floor, from the outside floor, is making our scene a bit more. It has a little green tint here, and I quite like that. Also, we can see that the tree in front of the round window looks very nice, and it's nice to add this color here to the palette. And now I want to turn on the sun, because we want to illuminate the tables and emphasize that the design here with the large openings is meant to illuminate the workspaces here in the table. And if we play around a little bit with the rotation and angle, we should find some nice spot that works well with our image. I like that it hits the background wall here, so you can read the light direction. But of course, it's way too strong now. So, but it's just for us to check what options we have here for the angle. So I quite like this one. It matches very good with the composition, and it hits the tables. And now we can start to work on the details. So we need to decrease the intensity, and if we increase the size here, our shadow is getting softer, so we don't have these hard edges here for our shadow. For interiors, I quite like that because we want to have the focus on the structure and the lines of the structure, and we don't want to implement any other lines here from the shadow. So this looks quite nice, and I would like to leave it like this. So but what I can see is our tables here are floating around, so we need to fix that. And also for the assets in our scene, I want to work a little bit more on placing them naturally or more believable here. So for that, yes, I'm just arranging stuff here, rearranging stuff here, and also these lots of carports at one place here. It's a bit too much for me, and putting this one carport here in between those tables, because later on there will be cutout people standing there, and it's always nice also if you have some assets that the people in the scene are interacting with. So this makes it more believable. And yeah, for the rest here, I'm just that's looks a lot better. So we can actually start to render our image now, and for that I'm switching on the multipasses, and I'm bringing in lots of passes here, different ID passes to select our assets. And even if we don't use all the passes here, it's always nice to have as much information as possible if we render out our image. So later in Photoshop, I will be thanking myself to have set up all those multipasses, because we can use this to in the post-production. So what I realized, because I wanted to integrate some cutouts, and they will also stand in between those tables, and behind those tables I will need to create a mask for each table. So that's what I realized after rendering it. So this is actually something, if you forgot to render a mask, you don't have to re-render your whole image with the beauty pass. You can also set certain masks for certain elements, and then you will see in a bit that you can tick on an option in your render settings and only render the masks. So therefore you don't have to here, like you can see it under the render settings, you can just render the masks. And yeah, so now we are right into Photoshop. The image is rendered, looks very nice, and I'm brightening it up a bit using curves and using a selective color filter here to work a bit on the colors, and yeah, implement a bit more warmth to the yellow tones, and yeah, make it eyeball it kind of to make it look a bit nicer. And each artist has its own kind of favorite color palette, and what I can really recommend is to color calibrate your monitor. And work with your calibrated monitor, because colors can be really make your image stand out, and if something looks wrong, it can be your color calibration that you might missed. So that's something you need to consider. So I was introducing another color balance filter here to give this colors a bit more contrast, and also I am brightening up those beams here in the roof structure a bit. So just I thought they were a little bit too dark. Alright, so I'm quite happy with the color correction, and I think the overall brightness and contrast looks nice. So we didn't do a lot of editing here, but we had a good start with our rendering, and now we can just implement some more cutouts here to the scene. I don't want to overcrowd the image. I just want to have the tell a bit more about the function of the room, and also give the viewer a good understanding of the dimensions. And as you can see here, I was using a screenshot with a 3D guy inside to get the scaling right, and now I'm using our masks for the tables to mask the tables out. So it's nice to have those masks and to use them for our cutouts. And yeah, I was thinking about placing 3 guys here around the table. Maybe they are architecture students and they work in this architecture workshop here, and maybe they have a little discussion about the model. And yeah, it's a little bit of a scene here, and we tell a story with that. But I don't want to overcrowd the image, because I think it doesn't need more people in it, and the architecture itself and the roof structure should be in the focus of attention. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And yeah, before we work a bit more on integrating those cutouts, I wanted to color correct a bit the color of the floor. So I was using a hue saturation here and decrease the saturation and adjust the hue a bit. And now before we work on the individual people here, I wanted to add one more thing. I thought there was a bit too much yellow here in the roof structure, so I was just grabbing those yellows and just desaturate them a bit. So now we can work a bit more on those cutouts. They actually look quite nice as they are. They fit into the lighting of the scene, but there's always some tiny adjustments we can do. So for this guy, I was switching him horizontally because the light direction wasn't fitting, and yeah, I can do some things. I want to bring down the brightness a bit, and also I want to use a 50% gray layer on top to use the dodge and burn tools to further highlight those shadow parts and illuminated parts. So I want to accentuate that a bit more, and also we can use a color balance here to match the rest of the scene a bit more. But yeah, that's basically all we need to do here. And yeah, the same applies to the other 2 guys. I wanted to desaturate it a bit and darken those parts that are in the shadow a bit more. And yeah, also for this last guy, Same here. We can darken the left side a bit to accentuate that the light is coming from the right side, and use a little desaturation on him. Yeah, something like this. So yes, I'm quite happy with that, and all we need to do is to apply some contact shadow, but only for this guy, because the other guy's feet we don't see them. So yeah, I'm just using a black color with a simple soft brush here and apply some shadow. And now we can use some overall adjustments if we want. So for example, use a more yellow saturation here on top, and also we can use a soft brush again and set the layer to soft light and paint in some more light here. This is just another way to accentuate the light direction. And yeah, I'm quite happy with that. So this is our final image, and I hope you liked the tutorial and learned something. If you want, leave me a like or a comment. I would be happy if you would also subscribe to the channel, and see you with the next tutorial.